here we go again. Despite me trying very hard not to do repairs, another one has come my way. This one is a Clipper 7G4. It's from 1954, broadcast band Radiogram, 7 valve. Nothing particularly special about it. In fact, it's more of a 5 valve equivalent, but it's quite a good looking set. It looks quite elegant, I think. Dark oak finish and storage down the bottom for records and what have you. Inside it's got a Monarch 4-speed turntable, automatic changer, but a gentleman bought it to me and it was his mother's. He remembers it. He's an older fella and he remembers it from when he was a kid, so I imagine it's probably been in the family since new or near new, and he wanted to get it going again. And unfortunately it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of people left fixing these, and it's not something I wanted to do, but we have it. I said yes. I'm terrible at saying no to stuff when I probably should just say no, but I'm more inclined to want to keep them going than to just say no. Hopefully it won't be anything too drastic. We'll spin it around and you can have a look at the back. There's a valve missing. It's going to need, well, it'll need caps, and we'll take a wee nosy and see what else it's going to need, but all in all it's in pretty good condition. There's some veneer chips off down the bottom, but I had not committed to doing any cabinet work on this and I don't think it really needs it. So we'll spin it around and you can take a look. So here we are behind the unit. You can see the chassis and speaker are completely exposed. You take a look on the speaker. We've got a speaker date of 18th of July 1955. It's certainly not a speaker brand I recognise. However, it would have been possibly the one it came with. It's not something I've seen in a Clipper chassis before, or not something I recall seeing in a Clipper chassis before. By this stage they were just about using RNA, English RNA speakers. The date is probably right. We'll just take a look at the labels inside the cabinet. Okay, so unfortunately no date, just signatures. Tested in the factory, and you can see the model code and the valve layout there. Now it's an EBC41 I think we're missing, but you can see, hopefully you can see there, ECH42, that's the mixer. So it's a 5 valve equivalent, it's got no RF stage in it. EF41IF. And then twin EL41s and push-pull in the output, so it probably has a reasonable punch to it, this set. Alright, so there is the chassis, and you can see that missing valve there, the EBC41. I probably have one of those. If not, I'll have to get one in. And for now we'll assume that everything else works. And of course, assumption's the mother of all screw-ups. We'll play it by ear. So I need to get that chassis out. Alright, so just a quick note in case you're working on one of these. In the very unlikely event, I can't imagine there's that many around. You can see the two metal carriers in here. They've got pins up the top which locate the front of the chassis, and then there's a couple of screw holes down the bottom which just have a couple of metal threaded screws that go through the normal tabs on the back of the chassis, so that's pretty easy to get out. So here's the chassis. Looks reasonably intact apart from that valve. Doesn't look like it's dirty or any major issues with it. You've got what looks like all original caps in here. It doesn't look like it's been touched from the factory, which is really nice to see. So I expect that's probably why it's not going, but at this stage it looks like Ducon caps throughout. You've got a Jubilee device down there that looks almost like a power resistor. Depends what that's connected to. All factory original looking. I don't see any signs in there that it's been worked on before, which is pretty neat to see, and you don't see that very often, particularly with New Zealand radios. And one thing with New Zealand sets is that we weren't a rich nation. We certainly weren't anything like the United States, where everything was quite elaborate, and so stuff got made to last. And by that I mean, A, it was made to last, but B, it was made to last as long as possible by repairs. So the fact that this hasn't had any repairs is quite interesting. Although it was in a holiday home, so it may not have got quite as much use as a set in a normal house. So it's going to get touched now. It's going to get fully recapped. There's no way I'm going to leave those caps in it just because it's original. It's a set with sentimental value but not much other value. So I'll photo document it for vintageradio.co.nz, and beyond that we'll get into giving it a good electrical repair and seeing if we can get it to work. Alright, so we got the dim bulb tester on it. I thought it might be worth, out of interest, just firing it up on the dim bulb and seeing what happens. I'll just give it a little bit of everything and see how we go. Now you'll notice I've got an EBC41 in there. I've stolen that from one of my early Bell Colts. Couldn't find one in the drawers, but it is the triode and detector used in early Colts. And what do you know? Volume with a bit of hum, which is to be expected. No RF stage, and we're out here in the country, so I'm just going to give myself over to being a bit of an aerial first. Bit of heterodyning going on here. That's all we need to hear of that. So we've definitely got some caps to replace in there. Got audio and we've got RF. The radio is effectively working, but there's definitely some issues. So definitely going to replace the power supply caps because they're going to need it. Then we'll replace all the paper caps because they're also going to need it. This has a lot of disc ceramics in it, and they should be fairly stable and fairly okay. So won't be touching those. Won't be touching any of the silver mica ones unless I get some crashing noises indicating it might have silver mica disease in there. Valves all appear to be working. Audio's okay. It was tuning, so RF stages are okay. So at this stage, everything's looking really, really good. I would say it really just needed an electrical service and obviously that valve replaced. So beyond that, I have no intention of replacing any valves in the set because they're working. Should I go through and test them? Sure. Do I have a tester that'll test miniature valves? Sort of. I've got my Paco valve tester has an adapter to put the smaller valves in it, but I have to kind of make up the settings from knowing what the valve specs are because it's an older tester and it just doesn't have data for it. So at this stage the testing will be done based on does it work, and if it works, it works. We'll see how we go. I may test them, but I don't think I need to. It sounds like everything's operating as it should. Okay, so I've got a copy of the schematic just to follow along while I'm working here. Interestingly, the EBC41s, the pair of them, the first one is being used as the first audio and detector. Second one, the diodes are just being completely unused, and it's just being used as a triode, as a phase inverter for the push-pull. So I guess they either had lots of these or they weren't expensive, and it was just easier to use another one. Maybe by doing that they got a bulk deal on them, and I don't know, but that's the kind of odd thing you see from time to time. First job is I'm going to replace these power supply caps down in here. Probably end up putting those on a tag strip just here. I've got enough length in that wire. This one might be a bit of a stretch. We'll just see how we go. I need to ensure I've got these around the right way. This looks like a 40-40-20 with the can being negative. And on the schematic we've got our first filter cap here, which is 40. Now I can either go 33 or 47. 33 would probably be okay, but the EZ40 can take a 50 mic first filter cap quite happily. That's its maximum rated, so I'll put a 47 in there, and for sake of simplicity I'll put a 47 in the second one as well. And if we follow the HT line up, it feeds the rest of the set, at which point there's the second 40 is there. So I'm guessing that between these two red tags here I'm going to find that resistor, will be that one there, which is on that tag, which that wire goes to that tag, which is that wire. So yep, there's our 1500 ohm resistor. So I'm going to get in here with a brush and just get some of this dusty crap off. It's making it hard to see things. So that 20 is the cathode bypass on the cathodes of the output by the looks of things. Alright, so I've just done some quick checking because I was a wee bit confused by the pinouts on these EL41s. This wire here, which comes from the 20 mic section, goes to pin 7 of this EL41. These are the two EL41s here, the output valves, and there's nothing else on that pin. So I know from the schematic the two cathodes are tied together in the schematic and bypassed with a 20 mic and 150 ohm. Now the 150 ohms here and this is connected to ground and the cathode pin, but it's not wired to this, but it is wired to pin 3, and that was doing my head in a little bit until I discovered that pin 3 is also a cathode connection. My diagram doesn't show that. It shows cathode is pin 7 and pin 3 is IC, so internally connected to what? That's actually off the Mullard data sheet. So they're wired straight across from here across to pin 3 of this one. 3 is internally connected to pin 7 here, so that's the wiring circuit they've used for that. That's fine, we'll leave that. That is almost bang on 150 ohms, 150.3 or something, so we're good there. So that's the 20 mic, that yellow one there. The 2 reds are 40s, and that is the power supply sorted. I'm going to use these for what they're not for. Best $2.50 you'll ever spend. Not as good as the Xeron ones that I bought 30 years ago, which lasted me up until fairly recently. But in fairness, if I wasn't so hard on them, I broke one set of jaws off after about 25 years of using and abusing them, cutting through stuff that was near enough to number 8 fence wire, and the other ones just dulled out finally after 30 years, so they got binned, and I've been replacing them with these, which I use for all kinds of stuff. And look, the blades are made of cheese. They're not particularly, they don't have a good life. They're nice and sharp when you get them, but they don't stay that way. But for what I pay for them and the abuse I give them, I'm happy just to replace them, you know, every couple of months and keep going. But at some point I may actually shell out for some good quality ones as well. But I'm terrible at using whatever tool I reach for and grab first. So I'll end up using good ones for bad things, and may as well just buy the cheapos. Okay, so our tag strip, I think I'm going to mount that on this screw here, which is one of the transformer screws. Now there's not a lot of thread there, but there should be enough to get that under it. So we'll take that off. I'll give the metal a bit of a clean up since it's going to be an earth point. I may actually run an earth off this earth tag onto here as well, just, well, not may, I actually will. So it's normally a good idea to give these tags a bit of a sand, but this stuff, these are Japanese made tag strip, and I bought new old stock, and it's actually normally really good at taking solder. But of course, the second you actually need it to, just flow it out properly. Alright, that is not the world's best job, but it is also not the world's worst. If I had $1 for every time I've done that, I mean, not the easiest thing to read because they're a bit rusty with age, but these are Blue Point. I've had these as long as my Xeron cutters. Bought at the same time from the Snap-on man in Dunedin, Pete, can't remember his last name. I remember Some guys referred to him as Pushy Pete. You know what, I'm bloody glad he pushed me into buying some of the tools that he did, because I've still got them 30 some years later and still using them and still giving myself blood blisters from them. These things, my favourite type of wire strippers. They have two sets of jaws, one that grabs the insulation and one that cuts and strips, and as they squeeze they bite down, then they pull apart, and then they ratchet over and they stay open while this opens and this opens, so you can get the wire out, and then they let go and slip together, and that's when you get your finger. And you'd think after 30 odd years I'd have figured out how not to do that, but I still do it. I still give myself blood blisters, and I still say rude words. I'm sure there's a lesson in that, but I'm not going to learn it. I refuse. So the memory card filled up and disappeared on me, and I didn't actually notice when it ended, so until I sit down and go through the footage I'm not going to know if I missed anything. So at this point, where I'm up to, just in case as a recap, I've got the main supply filter caps done. They're on a tag strip here and wired in. Wires shortened and rerouted to this tag strip, and an earth run down to this earth tag here. So the filter cap is now out of circuit. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 paper caps to do. As I've mentioned a couple of times, this radio makes use of disc ceramics, and those should be pretty stable, so I wouldn't expect the values of those to have moved. They're an oddball choice, particularly in audio, because they can be a bit microphonic. Obviously they work well enough in here. So at this point, the last thing I did before I noticed that the camera wasn't running was took this 12 microfarad 525 volt Ducon electrolytic out. Now I don't think it needs to be that high. Certainly its position in the circuit feeding the EBC 41 plates, or just on the HT just before that, which I would imagine is probably only a couple of hundred volts at most. So it came out of here, and I'm going to replace it, but I'm going to reroute it because the device it's replacing is somewhat smaller and the leads are somewhat shorter. And I'm thinking there's a little earth lug just here, an unused one. Lift that up slightly. I think I can just put it around the corner into that. So I'm going to try and take that old lead off the earth lug and fit this one in. If I can't get the old earth lead out without causing any damage here, then I'll leave it in and I'll just use it as a pigtail. It's going to depend just how twisted it is, and it does look like it's pretty twisted on there. And it's pretty heavy. Alright, that's come out reasonably easily. So, next question is, can I get solder on that earth lug without melting the wax on all the other stuff all around it? And the answer is yes. I'll need a little bit of heat to do that, but it'll go in. Now, unfortunately, this is not going to sit up the right way in terms of identification. The other thing I'm going to want to do is put some heat shrink on. Positive lead. Nice.
Nice.
Alright, so that goes against my typical preferences in that the value of that cap is on the underside of it, but I'd have to poke it up in the air to get to it, and I'd rather it sat down there close to the chassis. Clean up. So Clipper was Acrad's in-house brand, and it was their budget brand of radiograms and receivers. Sat alongside Pacific and Regent, which Regent was an in-house brand they'd had since about I should probably look this up, and Pacific, I believe they actually purchased from Maurice Anderson, who started Pacific in Wellington back in 1933 when it was using Radiocorp chassis. That all sort of fell apart around 1937, and Pacific ceased trading as far as I can tell. Maybe they traded out the radios that they had, the likes of the Model 38 spiral dial from Radiocorp. Would have been their last chassis, and I think they probably just sold up what stock they had. Then I believe he probably sold the brand to Acrad, who used it to replace their Futura brand, which they'd had since the early days. Futura was also the name of Keith Wrigley, who started Acrad, his name of his boat. So I don't know whether the name meant something to him and he named his boat and then named the brand, or whether he had the boat and thought that's a cool name for a brand as well. But that brand was replaced with Pacific. So Pacific and Regent became the two main brands sold from Acrad. Clipper was introduced as a budget line. And then 5-Star I think they introduced a bit later, and 5-Star from advertising it looks like was used as a parts name, but they certainly sold radios under the 5-Star brand as well, but I've only seen sort of the cheaper stuff in the 5-Star name. Yeah, that's where Clipper came into it. This set is obviously nothing super special. It's a good looking set. I actually quite like the design of it, and I like the sort of the dark oak or dark stained oak look of it. For now, throw the new caps into it and then we'll see how it performs. I'm expecting it to perform, it should be okay. But 5 valve sets do traditionally, or sets without an RF stage do traditionally struggle out here. Down there I think. That cap that I just took out ran from here right over to an earth lug here, but there's an earth lug down here that this one will get onto a little bit easier. So that's the one we're going to use. Have to heat that earth pin a little bit. Just put the pliers on that leg just to suck the heat out before it flicks up and melts its way into the guts of the capacitor, which is plastic film. Right, so that's sitting there, that's nice and easy to read, it looks good. 0.05 100 volt here, so it's actually a smaller cap, still not as small as that 630 volt one it's going to get replaced with though. That's in. But that's all the paper caps done now. Right, speakers in. Volume set to reasonable, tone set to reasonable. Via bulb. Flare, dim. Everything's warming up. Alright, that filament in the dim bulb does not look as bright as it did before, so there was some leaking going on.
Your show or whoever you're covering for.
Alright, so
oh good, I love that. I wish I had an epitaph to
punch
share
it
with
full.
you, but at the moment I don't. All I can think of is that Mark. It was quite clever.
The ship, let's hear about Sir Ernest Shackleton.
Shackleton's famous, of course. Most people think of him as English, but he's actually born in Ireland and moved to England when he was 10.
So
he's an interesting guy.
you can see the reception's pretty poor as soon as I let go of the aerial. Still working, but the reception's very low here. Actually, the performance is not too bad, but it is evening, and evening always gives better reception. Yeah, at this stage I'm going to probably call that fixed. We'll reassemble it tomorrow in the light. Alright, so that's the chassis back in. It was a simple case of sliding it back onto the cradle, putting those 2 screws in. Speaker was 4 screws. This cradle arrangement in here is fantastic. It actually makes life really easy, and I wish more radiograms had it. Obviously it's an expense that not all manufacturers wanted to go to, but that metal cradle that it slides onto is a couple of alignment pegs at the top, which means it goes exactly where it should, and 2 screws in the back, and the chassis in. Alright, so enough waffle, let's get this thing turned around and have a play with it. Just for this first fire up, I'm going to use the dim bulb tester. So we're fire bulb, we're off, some volume. I'm not expecting any problems here, having recapped it, looking like what I'd expect for a 7-valve set.
Socialism. I was lucky enough to work in the Soviet Union before the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Put it through.
If that is what the people think socialism is, it is an evil system where the people are exploited.
Good old talkback, eh?
From openly speaking. So you've got no...
Alright, so that's working. Something I actually just noticed, and I shut it off so we don't get stupid copyright strikes. I'm just going to unwind this aerial wire, because we may have another problem which I had missed.
Almost 2 o'clock here on Coast 105.7 with Lorna. Now, I've never been particularly fond of magpies. They always seem mean birds. But I've changed my mind. I thought maybe I've got a bad rap.
What is it about the that, despite everything, still inspires you?
So,
2 o'clock news in a moment.
Here we go.
Make a new kitchen your New Year's resolution.
Tone's working.
Order that new kitchen from Easy Kitchens this month and you'll receive a $500
That's
grocery
fully,
voucher.
yeah.
The perfect start to 2021.
That's volume
and the
fully
perfect
down.
way to fill those new cupboards. Plus get 12 months interest free. Season C supply. See Easy.
So, we have another problem. Now, in my experience, there's a couple of things that can cause that. The volume is from this 500k pot here, and then there's what looks like about a 270 ohm resistor to ground, and we've got some feedback from the speaker feeding back through to here as well. So we could have a Crook EBC41 detector which is leaking audio even when the pot is fully down. Now I'm going to check that out by swapping the two EBC41s and see if that makes a difference. Or we've got some other point here, possibly this resistor too high and actually holding this too far above ground. But my guess at this point is going to be maybe an internal leak in the detector. So we'll swap the detector and the phase inverter around, see what happens. If that doesn't do anything, then we'll pull the chassis back out and we'll take a look around here. Alright, that's those swapped. Power it back up.
In connection to a serious aged between 24 and 39.
Alright, so that solved that problem. Mostly solved it. It's still not fully shutting down the volume, and it may not be designed to fully shut down just looking at the way that circuit is.
When arresting a
That is a far improved situation. So possibly a couple of better EBC41s might solve this problem. I don't have any more. I'll talk to the gentleman who owns this and I'll let him know that that is an issue, and I will talk to him about possibly ordering a couple of new old stock ones if I can find them, and he can pop those in himself. They're not difficult to get to or to replace. Now, I haven't actually checked to see what the needle's like in this, but throw our scungy old record in. Go for a bit of that, I think. Now we should be able to Alright, well that's good. Record player's working. That wasn't something that was part of what I needed to have a look at, but it's good to know that it's functional. What I might do is, a lot of these old record players, they all work very much the same, but it seems to me that the knowledge of how to use them has gone, and I do get asked quite a lot how to actually make them work, and I hear that people don't really know how they work. So I might just do a quick demo of that while we're here, and if that's all good, then we'll call it done. Alright, so using these old record players is fairly simple. It might seem a little bit daunting because of the controls, but really it's not a big deal. So this is an automatic changer. You can tell by the length of the spindle. It's got a big long spindle. It also has this arm up here which holds the stack of records in place and some kind of sensor to let it know that the record has dropped. So in this case it's that little red arm, and this actually could use a wee bit of oiling. The grease has gone a wee bit stiff in there, so you just got to make sure that that's sitting down, and if it is sitting up like this then it's probably needs a wee bit of lubrication. So record onto the spindle, cleaning it first so you don't have all the dust that this one's got. The arm goes on top to hold the stack level, and you've got your speed control down here on this particular model, 16, 33, 45 and 78. Now 16s you're probably not going to see, they were pretty rare. 33s your typical LP, 45s for your little singles, and 78 are for the old shellac 78s. 78s take a different needle because the groove is much bigger. So if you're going to play a 78, make sure you've got a 78 needle. You'll wreck an LP needle. It'll drop right down into the bottom of the groove and grind the tip off. Those old shellac records are also limited play, so if you've got a special one, be careful. I have one in particular which I am very fond of, which is the Tanza No. 1 Blue Smoke, which I considered playing once, but I probably never will. It's probably been played to death and it's probably on its last legs, so just be aware of that. Those shellac records, they did wear. So in this case, we're playing an LP, it's on 33 and it's ready to go. Now on the other side, the controls, it's in the off position now. It's got an on or manual position, so you can actually put the record down manually and manually lift the arm onto the record if you want to. And it's got a reject position. Now that reject position is also the automatic start on this particular turntable. So if we just go around to on, then the platter will start spinning underneath, but nothing else will happen. So we just push it round once into the reject position, and it should automatically start playing. And if we had a stack of records, by pushing it to that reject position again, okay, so there it's working, and we can basically end the play by rejecting the record. Now if there was another record on the stack, it would drop that down and start playing it. The little red sensor arm would trigger and it would know to bring the arm out and play again, but because we only have one record, it will automatically stop. So that is an automatic record player, and that's as simple as they are. If that functionality isn't working, then it probably needs a service, which is fairly common for something of this age. So just show you that manual operation. You can just go to on, the turntable will spin, and then you can manually drop the needle. Right. And then you can reject manually or automatically. So that's it. That's manual operation and automatic operation for an old turntable. Not too hard, but it can be a little bit confusing if you haven't used one before. Or in fact, if you haven't used one for a while. Certainly I had to reacquaint myself with the controls when I came back to these, having not used one for probably 30 odd years. Different models have different ways and means of controlling them, but they're all much of a muchness. Yeah, if you're trying to get one going, have a play with it. If it's not working properly, there's a really good chance that it needs lubrication. The grease that they used in these is, what, 60 odd years old now, so 70 years old even, so it will probably need some work. Now, people will tell you that you need to strip it all down and you've got to get all that old grease out, and it's a really difficult job and it's horrible, and yeah, if you strip it all apart, it probably is horrible. What I've found is that 3-in-1 oil is actually slow penetrating into grease. It will actually break the grease down. So if you get into the areas where your grease has started to clog up, and put 3-in-1 oil on it and then slowly work it in, and then leave it for 24 hours and come back and slowly work it in a bit more, put a bit more in, and then leave it for another 24 hours. I found that 2 applications over 2 days will generally free up most record players to the point where they're perfectly usable. And I've had no problems with that. Is it the right way to do it? I don't know. I'm not a record player technician. I'm not an expert with turntables. I just know what works for me, and in the ones that I've done, that has been a perfectly adequate repair. So give that a go if you need to. 3-in-1 oil, you know, it's cheap, it's ubiquitous, you can get it pretty much everywhere. You don't need to blather it in, but you do need enough to actually work its way into that grease and free it up. Alright, so with that, I'm going to call this done, with the exception of the possible problem with the volume not going all the way to 0, which I am pretty sure is a valve-based problem. We're done.